Hello and welcome to our Deakin Alumni webinar, presented today by Dr. Phillip Roӧs, Director of the Live Smart Research Lab. I'm Gemma from the Alumni Relations team, and today we're broadcasting from Deakin's waterfront campus. Our topic today is Designed by Nature, How Century Architecture Can Improve Our Wellbeing. Our past webinar and seminar recordings are posted on the Deakin Alumni website, which is deakin.edu.au/alumni on the webinar and resources page. So this webinar today will be recorded and it will be available in approximately 3 weeks' time after we've added captioning to it. Your microphone is muted today, but you can communicate with us via the question box that should appear on your screen. So while we're just waiting, we're going to start right on 12:30, but we might test out the question box. So if you could let us know where you're dialing in from today and what you studied. Our presentation today will run for approximately 40 minutes and it'll be followed by question and answer time. Starting to hear from lots of people. Fantastic. So hello to Brett from Audible, Joanne from Sydney, Jane from Melbourne, Janelle from Cairns. We've got people from all over the place. Mount Eliza, Burwood, fantastic. And I'd be really interested to hear as well whether you are dialing in for a professional interest or personal interest. So is this something that you're just really curious about the topic, or is this something that you really want to hear about for where you work? So we've got quite a mixture coming through, a bit of professional, a bit of personal. So throughout the presentation, please continue to type your questions in as you think of them. Don't just wait until the question time at the end. We're going to answer as many questions as we can towards the end, and hopefully we get through them all. But I know this is a really interesting topic, so you might have a lot of questions today. So for those who have just joined us, my name's Gemma. I'm from the Alumni Relations team here at Deakin. Your microphones are muted today, so people are just typing in to the question box to tell us where they are, what they've studied, and whether it's sort of professional or personal interests that you're dialing in today for. So our presenter today is Dr. Phillip Roӧs, the Director of the Live Smart Research Lab. So spending time in nature has significant positive effects on our emotional and physical well-being. But how do we maintain this in a time of ever-increasing urbanisation? And what does it take to give a building soul? I'm going to pass it over to now, and we can hear this wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about design by nature, sensory architecture and well-being. And thank you for giving up some of your precious time to listen to me, and I hope I won't bore you and make you fall asleep during the next 40 minutes. So the first, I think I'm just giving you an overview on what will be included in this lecture. I'm first going to address a global issue, going through to the next item of current state of affairs of sustainability, move beyond sustainability, what is designed by nature. Then I'll look at biophilia and biophilic design patterns. The movement of biophilic cities and the biophilic cities network, 2 examples of biophilic design, then a pattern language, the architecture for life, and really a bit more about design with nature. First of all, I just want to do an acknowledgement to country. We wish to acknowledge and pay respect to the elders, the families and forebears of the Wadawurrung peoples, the traditional custodians of the lands and waters upon which this lecture is occurring. The Aboriginal elders listening, as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples of the Australian continent. And then personally, I just want to say thank you for this privilege to share this beautiful country, because if you excited like me about nature and explore nature, you realize how wonderful this continent of Australia is and all the hidden secrets. And this connection what our Indigenous people got with nature is really important. And perhaps that's something that we need to consider in the future when we move forward in planning our built environment. I want you to look at this picture. That's the Earth. Perhaps I'll call it Mother Earth. What do you see? It's quite interesting. In Ian McHarg's book, Design with Nature, the chapter, The Cast and the Capsule, he paraphrased Lauren Isley, and he used a much older and black and white picture of Earth. And he paraphrased these following words when he starts his lecture to his students. He said, "Man in space is enabled to look upon the distant Earth, a celestial orb, a revolving sphere. He sees it to be green from the verdure on land, algae greening the oceans, a green celestial fruit. Looking closely at Earth, he perceives blotches, black, brown, grey, and from these extended dynamic tentacles upon the green epidermis. These blemishes he recognizes as the cities and the works of man, and asks, is man but a planetary disease?" Indeed, as recognized in the 1960s, now in the 21st century, we've got this disease in this form, and that's what I call it, the rapid urbanization and decline of rural areas. So to sustain a sustainable future, we need to change the way how we live, and this entails major transformations in the ways our global society functions and interacts with natural systems. So why do we have this problem? I think we need to ask this question and also think back to that sphere that we saw, and when Ian McHarg said this is a planetary disease. So it's basically simple, in my opinion. I don't know others, but from the 20 to 21st century, the planning and design and construction of the built environment has been unimaginably bad, reckless and unacceptable. It is this way, the way that we design and build our cities, that resulted in a degeneration of the Earth's natural systems and now eventuating in unprecedented impacts of climate change. So many of you could say, well, we do a lot of good things in sustainability. But yes, there's lots that we do. But the current state of affairs, like according to McDonough, says that sustainable is really only 100% bad. Because what we try to do is we sustain the current conditions that's currently really degenerating and destroying a lot of our natural resources on Earth. So what we need to do is to move beyond sustainability. And to do that, we need to move from a degenerative system to a regenerative system. And in this diagram, I try to demonstrate this. If we look at sustainable, that's neutral, 100% less bad, according to McDonough. That's where we sustain current ecosystems and reduce impacts on nature. We're in essence just keeping a degenerating system at play. Even green design is just relative improvement and efficiency, but it doesn't regenerate places. So if we want to move to the next step, we need to move up the scale. So we need to move to regenerative context where humans become part of nature, or we acknowledge that we are part of nature, and then to a regenerative adaptive or evolutionary spiral where humans participate as nature. And that's the wrong one. And that means to be able to do that, we need to design with nature to going up the spiral. So design by nature, what does that mean? A lot of you probably heard about biophilic design, and it's quite a trendy thing that's happening currently. But I see this really just the first step in the context of sensory architecture. And as I go through this webinar and through the slides, I will demonstrate why biophilic design is the first step. Although it's really important that we need to do it, we need to embrace quite a bit of things beyond that. So if you don't know about biophilic design and didn't hear about it, there's a terminology biophilia, and then there's the terminology of biophilic design. So what is biophilia? So biophilia is, in essence, the innately emotional affiliation of human beings to other living organisms. So innate means hereditary, and hence as part of this ultimate human nature. So when we look at the biophilia context that's been coined by Wilson, it is sort of saying that your love with nature or your direct connection to nature. So it's really important to acknowledge that. And we need to see if we can use this innately connection with nature to our benefit. And this is where biophilic design come in. Biophilic design is then the design and the practice of design in planning places that seeks to create a good habitat for people that is biologically, as a biological organism. So we create a space that enhances biophilia, and that will improve then our health and well-being. So in essence, biophilic design is just the practice of creating environments to enhance our biophilia or inherited biophilia connection. Well, biophilic design, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps many of you heard about it. Now, it becomes a catchphrase, and the danger is that biophilic or biophilia really been just used let's say, on the top of the surface. The trend is, it's like in the old days where sustainability just become a catchphrase, or everyone do sustainability, but they don't really do the correct things. It's where with biophilic design, it started to become a trend. If I just put a few pot plants, a green wall here and there, I say I'm doing biophilic design. And this is where you just touch the surface, and I'll say this trend is, there's no substance under the surface. And it's important that we understand, as practitioners, as well as people that use these spaces, that there's much more to biophilic design than just the physical and visual things we see. And what are these things? It's really important to identify that. So upon further investigation of a lot of projects where that gets claimed that it's biophilic design, you will see they only implemented a few things, but it doesn't include all of the patterns of biophilic design. And it's important to include all of these patterns, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So to achieve the biophilic effect, if you think of it, when you go into nature, you always will feel well, but it's a lot of things that's triggering it. And we call that the biophilic effect. So this biophilic effect is more than what we can see on the surface, is what's happening behind it. The deep inherent patterns and connections and characteristics of nature and nature systems. And this is where the challenge comes in, to bring that into our built environment. But if we can get it right, things will be really good. If we design with nature, the end result is an outcome designed by nature that will improve our health and well-being. Things that could happen is improve our cognitive functionality and performance. It improves our psychological health and well-being, our physiological health and well-being. And there's many, many studies showing that this happens when we apply biophilic design. Now, what is interesting, the practice of biophilic design is we use the term patterns, and you probably heard me saying that earlier. We don't use the terms like principles or attributes. So I probably challenge anyone, if you read anything online or article and say this project included biophilic principles, then you know that the understanding or the deep connection and what biophilia about is not applied. So what is a pattern? A pattern is a particular situation that can cause problems. And when you look at a pattern, you look how the components of a pattern relate to each other in the solution. And when you describe a pattern, it's got a descriptive entity to it, but it also gives you cross references to other things, and it also explains what a solution would be. So it sounds a bit complex, but for example, if I'm going to get related to the first pattern of biophilic design as visual connection to nature. So just think about a pattern. It doesn't mean I just look at nature, but it is, well, if I got a problem and I can't see nature, as how do I get visual connection to nature? But also, how does this connect to my environment around me? What do I need to do to make this work? And also, why is this good? What is the reaction and the outcomes when I look at something in nature? So you can see it's quite a very complex science to bring biophilic design in, but the benefits is unbelievable. But this is where it goes into a language, and some of you would have known Christopher Alexander's work. When we apply this as a pattern language, it becomes a story. It's like in the old days, and even when we were kids, there's always storytelling. So a biophilic design becomes a language where we tell the story of what must happen in a place. So here we can see a pattern language is then an attempt to express the deeper wisdom that brings aliveness within a particular field of human endeavor. So really what it's saying, as you read it there, it's about bringing this place to life of things tells a story that really is then empirical, verifiable. So about biophilic design patterns, the story about how that happened. Initially, Terrapin Bright Green issued a publication, you can find it online, where it discussed 14 patterns of biophilic design. Now, these 14 patterns came from the work of Kellett. Kellett initially had about 20 odd principles and then realized you need to address patterns. I think there's more than 70 odd things connected to patterns, and Terrapin Bright Green Browning that led this research identified that if we use these 14 patterns, we sort of capture all of these other elements that Kellett done. How this work in healing environments, a very well-known professor in mathematics science that always challenge our architecture and tell us that our architects are messing up the world is Nikos Salingaros. And in that publication, he really shows how patterns in a pattern language help us to implement biophilia and create healing environments. And then here at the Live Smart Lab and Deakin University, we then done some work for the Melbourne Metro project a couple of years ago. And part of that research was how do we identify to bring these biophilic design patterns into the design of stations, underground spaces, and so forth. And the research identified that we really need to include a 15th pattern that I'll discuss a bit later. But the fundamental message from all of these is that we need to create healthy places, and we need to adapt these patterns and biophilic design to be able to create these healthy places. So this is just to look at biophilic design patterns and what is the health benefits. So I could keep on saying, yes, it's good for us, but we need to prove that there is some real things happening. I'll go later through the patterns in detail, but for example, I discussed visual connection to nature. If you look at it here, what happens if we include that in our built environment? Stress reduction is a column, and you could see there, for example, studies show that lowered our blood pressure and heart rate, our cognitive performance get improved, our mental engagement and attentiveness and performance in the workplace. Our emotion and mood and preference is really positively impacted. Our attitude and our overall happiness gets increased when we've got visual connection to nature. If we go to pattern number 2, non-visual connection to nature, I will explain a bit later what that means. But again, this reduces systolic blood pressure and stress hormones. It impacts on our cognitive performance, and there's perceived improvements in our mental health and tranquility that we experience. And so we can go through all these these patterns. Example, another one is pattern number 6. We know, and green buildings or buildings that get green star ratings and so forth, one thing that's always strived for is daylight, the access to daylight and the daylight factor. What is different in biophilic design, we talk about dynamic and diffuse light. That means the light that we bring into our build space must change over time. It must be warm, it must be cold, it needs to have some color. So all of these things then will trigger our senses and improve our well-being. So doing just daylight design is just the very first step in really addressing our health and well-being. It needs to go beyond that. And we could see there what happens when you put dynamic and diffuse light into the mix. It gives us some positive impact in our circadian system and the functioning of it. If I go to the next one, just also about some biological responses here and what improves our health and well-being. An interesting one here is risk and peril. So that's, for example, really, if we're a little bit scared of something, it means that triggers some reactions and chemical reactions in our body. And what is really interesting, as it showed there, it resulted in strong dopamine or pleasure responses sometimes, and that will increases your attention rate and so forth while you're in a space. So when you start to put all of this together, you create an environment that is really, really interesting and really improve our health and well-being. Going down the line, there's the number 15. We recognize that we need to bring in virtual connection with nature, because in some instances we're really constrained in urban environments about the access to perhaps other biomorphic forms or natural environments, and we need to bring this in. And tests were showing that virtual connection to nature is actually quite good. And I always use the example here, I don't know if you love the dentist, but I don't like, I like my dentist, but I don't love him, because when I'm on that chair, I'm really nervous, and I don't even know it, but I sweat a lot. And if you have above you a virtual sky, a video playing about nature, some bird song, tests were showing that people then really, really relax in that situation. So this is when we could bring in certain circumstances virtual connection in, where you don't have the luxury to connect to other things in nature. So now I'm just going to go a bit through biophilic design patterns and what they mean. So there is 15 patterns, and it's really categorized in 3 areas. The first one that we refer to as nature and space. Visual connection to nature is really a view to elements of nature, living systems and natural processes. And on the right-hand column, what is the application? What must you do? For example, ensure visual access to real presentations of nature, in preference to simulated nature, non-nature presentations. The second one is non-visual connection. Interesting, that's the auditory, haptic, and olfactory or gustatory stimuli that engender and deliberate and positive reference to nature. So if we combine more senses, then that means we actually got a better reaction. So a lot of times people think, we just put a few pot plants or green wall in a space. That's not enough, because you only got a visual connection. You need to bring all these other things in. So this is where in a design environment is a challenge, but it's also actually quite exciting. Non-rhythmic sensory stimuli result in patterns of nature's movements. So for example, I had an earlier discussion, if you just bring in movements, for example, of waves and patterns like that in a carpet, already it brings some of the stimuli in, and will, in your subconscious mind, let that stimuli happens and trigger some of your senses. Thermal airflow and variability, quite important, I think, in our modern buildings because we got air conditioning space. As human beings, this is not the best for us, so we need that variability in our airflow and how things change in temperature, because through the day that will help us to actually be more active and go through the cycles of life. Presence of water, very important. We know that when you're close to water, you relax. So how can we bring that into our built environment? Dynamic and diffuse light, I discussed that earlier. Not just the normal daylight design, but bring in the dynamic diffuse light. Connection with natural systems. Now, this is quite interesting. This is about the processes of nature. So it is not about seeing a green plant. It is about the hydrology, the geology, the change of terrestrial and aquatic wildlife, there's diurnal changes, seasonal patterns, all of this. So you can bring that in because that is why we really connect with that how that nature, the system of nature work behind the scenes. The next one is natural analogs. And this is where we look at biomorphic forms and patterns, so symbolic references to textures, contoured things, and so forth. Material connection to nature is probably an easy one. That's when if we could bring in timber and all those type of things into our built environment, subconsciously we connect to that materiality of nature. Complexity in order is really important, and recent studies show that the more we get sensory stimulation with complexity, so that is in old architecture of old buildings and even art, there's a lot of ornament. So the more ornament and more things is around us, that actually triggers stimulation, and that really, really improve our health and well-being. So the more plain walls are, and there's nothing that triggers our stimulation, the less positive it is for us. So that's quite a very interesting one that's happening. The next categories that we look at is nature of the space. It's really how does the space look like? So prospect, very interesting. We always need an unimpeded view over a distance. And how can we bring this in? Refuge is a place of withdrawal. So very interesting. If you think of it, if you're in a busy office environment in a busy city, you will be so tired at night. It's because you need that refuge sometimes during your day to go to. So how do we bring a space in where we can withdraw and have some quiet time? And then mystery is interesting. These days, you will see just open office spaces or big open spaces. In the old days, you walk into buildings and you don't know what's around the corner. What is this next door doing? So mystery is one of the things. By nature, we want to find things out. We're always curious as human beings. So if we can bring mystery in, so a bit of interest into our spaces, it will trigger also positive effects. Nature of the space, going further, risk and peril. As I mentioned, if there's a bit of danger, so we sort of act positively to it. And then virtual connection to nature, as we really want to bring in virtual elements of nature when we can't have access to any of the others in a space. Excuse me. So now I just want to say, well, if we look at this design and quite a bit of this get implemented in perhaps the building context or single buildings or small spaces, we really want to make a change. We need to do it at large scale. And this is where we need to look at cities. And Biophilic cities give us the opportunity to have a real impact when we bring Biophilic design in. So Timothy Beatley, this is a quote from him. What is a biophilic city? He said a biophilic city is a city that seeks to foster a closeness to nature. It protects and nurtures what it has, actively restores and repairs the nature that exists, while finding new and creative ways to insert and inject nature into the streets, buildings, and urban living environments. So if we can do this at the city scale, obviously we will then make a bigger difference than at small scale. And because our cities is really the culprits of destroying nature, because we use all the resources, we know our high dense urban environments is really not good for our health and well-being. Isn't it common sense that we need to change our cities to biophilic cities? And why are we not doing that? I think it's really important that we need to ask this question, especially now at the climate crisis, as our young people start to raise that issue, is how can we improve our built environments at the city scale to really help with nature and our own health and well-being. So let's go back to the topic of this lecture, Design by Nature, a Sensory Architecture and Well-being. So my question is it possible to bring our dead cities back to life? If your city is just a concrete block and it's straight lines, that means it's dead space and it's a dead city. Well, in essence, have nature as an integrated part of the built environment. Yes, that will really help us that a city then became a healing environment. And this is really interesting. Christopher Alexander in pattern 173 of his pattern language book mentioned this in the 1977, I think it's so valid. And I just want to read it. He goes, people need contact with trees and plants and water. In some way, which is hard to express, people are able to be more whole in the presence of nature, are able to go deeper into themselves, and are somehow able to draw sustaining energy from the life of plants and trees and water. Now, that is so true, isn't it? You just can go deep into yourself. You can get lost even if you go and sit in the park and read your book. So why not doing this? Because in the 70s, Alexander already said to us, we need to do this. In the modern society now, we don't do this. We need to actually look how we can implement this. Well, the good news is there is organizations, there's countries even, and a lot of cities and practitioners that try to do this. And what we're going to do now is look at a few biophilic design examples. The first one that I want to raise really is Singapore as a biophilic city in a garden. And I'm not going to give you many pictures, but those three sort of give you an idea. Even there's sort of a modernistic view or modernism in Singapore. There's so much that they do to actually create healthy environments. Now, a little bit of info about this is this island city state, so the whole Singapore as a city, it's also a country, occupies really a small space. It's about 700 square kilometers on the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula and have got about 5.4 million people. Now, in the 1960s, their motto was that Singapore needs to be a garden city. Now, that is okay, but recently the city has really gone forward with a new motto, and they say that a city needs to be in a garden. So that's quite different. That means my city sits in a garden. That means the city will become a garden. So the city-state also has made considerable efforts now and integrate nature in their city. And if anyone visits Singapore, and it's really great if you can visit areas in Singapore, not just going into the main attraction, that's Gardens by the Bay, and then leave. But if you go look at the living environments, how in a very highly densely populated areas, nature's been brought into high-rise buildings, high-rise residential areas, and so forth. But what is interesting is Singapore changed their motto now to say a biophilic city in the garden. So why? Because biophilic, as we know, is that response to biophilia. That's our innate connection to nature that creates healthy and well-being environments. And Singapore want to be that city that's healthy and creates well-being. Now, interesting, they brought it into their planning regulations. So, for example, in the central shopping area, such as the Orchard Road, there is now a requirement that any new or refurbished buildings must replace the whole footprint or floor plate coverage of a building with green space. So this must be done with green roofs, green walls, green balconies, and so forth. So you can see it's quite a challenge. So when you take the footprint away, you need to get that into that space. And then some practices like Wua architects say, well, we go a little bit further, and I'm putting up this one is the Kampung Admiralty in Singapore, and I visit that, and it's really amazing. If you look at that picture on the left, if you look at that, is that a mountain or a hill behind with trees on top? And we sort of got this building dotted into the hill. No, that is actually a high-rise building, and this is the internal court, the internal area, so it's sort of a U shape, where right on top, rooftop, is huge trees. And if I walked onto this garden, if you look at the right-hand picture, that is the scale of it. So how come engineers and people tell us we can't put trees on the top of buildings? There's many examples like this. What is really interesting that this project is fantastic because it is a community project, and it includes a school, there's a medical center, there's a shopping center, there's all of these activities. There's an elderly retirement village part of this. Everything condensed, and everyone connects, and everyone really works and love the space. This top garden too, no food is vegetables has been brought from outside. That whole community is being sourced, or food been given from the garden, their veggie garden on the roof. So this is working with nature. How amazing is that? And that's fantastic. So Wua Architects, Richard Hassel is the co-founder. There's a quote that I really love that he said, I mean, if we think of our green buildings, our green sustainable certifications and all energy efficiency and all the stuff we're doing here in Australia, we think, oh, I got a 6-star building, it's so great. I would just want you to listen to this quote. Richard said, stop evaluating buildings on how little they harm the environment. For example, get a green star and be energy efficient, reduce our water use and so on. Start judging them on how much they enhance the environment. That is really important. So this Kampung Admiralty is Singapore's first integrated retirement community, and they took the 2018 World Architectural Festival Award, beating 535 projects from 57 countries. And what really came out is that how they got it right to really integrate nature with their buildings. But I want to go now to design with nature, or design by nature, and I call it the architecture for life. This is going beyond biophilic design. This is where we look at regenerative-adaptive futures and the architecture for life. Architecture for life is based on the idea where design is an adaptive and transformation process, where generative codes are supported by morphogenetic sequences that creates wholeness, and is in these patterns where we create a language that we can use to reconnect our built environments and place that place that's got soul with nature, as I call that. The rules of architecture for life's rules are really about living structures. Living structures comprises the geometrical rules of biological forms, a language of patterns, in essence, the combination of geometrical properties and elements of landscapes embodied in the complex structures found within all living forms. Phew, that's a big sentence, that. But basically what it is saying is that this geometrical rules that is in nature is what we need to bring in our structures of the built environment. And what Christopher Alexander said in the 70s is to create living structures. So our built environment can be living if we do it right. And that, in essence, then we create health and well-being in our built environment. But what is the fundamentals? I call beauty of things. What is beauty? I don't want to go into that, but the beauty in architecture or in our natural environment is really the quality of life. Some things you can say, oh, that looks good, but sometimes you say there's really beauty. And when that's there, it really, in essence, embraces quality of life. So the perceived quality of life in buildings then and spaces comes from the geometry of all these scales and things that connects to you as an individual. And that means, and then there's perceived beauty. So I've got these example of photos of ruins in Pate, the Lamu archipelago, sorry for that, East Africa, when I visited. And there's beauty. Even these are ruins. You see the beauty, you experience it, but you don't really know why. It's because of these fundamentals of those patterns that's hidden. That means it needs to become a language. And if I look at these pictures, there's a language walking through these spaces, even as a vernacular architecture, and this African vernacular architecture it makes it alive without, even in some instances when there's no human beings around, the place is alive. And this is interesting. When I started off giving our acknowledgement to country, it is where our indigenous regional vernacular architecture of a lot of indigenous cultures across the world have the soul, because it connects deeply with place. So I just quote you again from Salangaros, where he say every indigenous traditional architecture has its own form language, more accurately, a group of languages that evolves with variations over time and across locality. The language is also a continuation of traditional arts, social practices, and material culture. Architecture that's adaptive of its form language blends and connects with the pattern language that brings us then to this vernacular. And what's really important, if you look at this traditional architecture, it includes social practice, material culture, and connection to place. And I think this is where we lost it with our modern environment. We lost that bit of connection. Architecture for life is also a sensory architecture, and Cohen, that is an eco-psychologist, he notes that the visible phenomena is underpinned by geometric patterns, but really the sensory attraction that we've got to things in the natural world is what really enhance our lives. So can we use the sensory attraction or the law of attraction that he refers to and bring that into our built environment space? A very interesting question. I believe we can do that if we apply a unified architectural theory. And for me, a unified architectural theory is about architecture that's linked to biology. That is an architecture that is a human act that invades. Well, no, sorry, that's the wrong word. So I jump a bit forward. So what is architecture? In my opinion, architecture is a human act that invades and displaces the natural ecosystem. So if we based our architectural theory on biology, when biological order is destroyed by our human buildings, we actually need to restore that. So when we have an architecture that starts its theoretical basis with the natural ecosystem, that we don't want to destroy it, but rather enhance it, it changes the way our architecture and built environment will impact. So that is an architecture then that's directly linked to nature. So where did this start? This crazy journey that I'm on is when I research and look at this connection I've got to nature. Pattern language by Christopher Alexander is really the foundation of a different thinking on how we do and have to apply the design and build of our built environments. He's been not happily accepted, obviously, because at one stage he said we don't need architects because people of place can really build their own and develop their own environments, and it's better. He wrote a book, The Nature of Order, a 4-volume that's really go deeply into our connections. The Principles of Urban Structure by Salingaros then follow on, and then The Nature of Higher Power is Cohen's work, where he connects us psychologically with that. So when I'm talking about architecture for life and this theory that I have for regenerative adaptive pattern language, that I'm submitting my manuscript Monday coming for this book, is through this process where, drawing from Alexander's Nature of Order, the architecture of life need to advance us to a much needed new way of doing things. And just about design with nature, on the right hand side, that is my mock-up of Springer's Nature's cover. It's probably not going to look like that, but that in that book I go deeply into what I discussed about. It's about regenerative adaptive design for sustainable development, how interactions between people and their natural environments really needs to be addressed. Heal the Scars, a project that we've done recently, and we talk about how we need to heal these environments. Not about biophilic design and design to nature, but Geelong's Changing Landscape, done by Professor David Jones and myself as editors, and over 18 really experts in their field, is really about how the landscape changes and how we need to acknowledge these things and rethink about a tapestry when we're going to design for the future. So quite interesting things going on. So just getting to the end, I just want to quote this, and I always love to quote this, and perhaps there's some of you listening and say, oh, there goes Dr. Phil again, because I heard this before. I always quote this, and I mended a bit because there's a few things that I think that need to be, but it is for me a really beautiful piece. And I'm going to read it. It says, if we hope to bring our towns and buildings back to life, we must begin to recreate our own regenerative languages in such a way that all of us can see them, with the patterns connected to nature, and them so intense, so full of life again, that these languages will almost of its own accord begin to sing. To work our way toward the shared and living language, once again, we must first learn how to discover patterns which are deep and capable of regenerating life. And then lastly, I just want to ask you this question. What is the legacy that you will leave behind for your children and grandchildren? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that insightful presentation. We've got quite a few questions coming through already, so I'll just start reading them out. Hopefully we can get to most of them today. So Sarah has asked, this is quite an in-depth question. She said, I'm very interested in how you see biophilic design supporting sustainability. I understand how it supports the environment by using sustainable materials. However, there are other biophilic patterns that, whilst supporting well-being, may increase the use of other resources which require processes and materials that are not sustainable and could cause damage to the environment. Could you please share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, very good question. Well, ignore sustainability and let's just do everything with biophilic design. No. I guess this is always the big question. When we do one thing and too much of it, we destroy something else. But biophilic design, a lot of the patterns is more, we can do it by using sustainable materials. And this is where, when I'm talking about going beyond biophilic design, when you look at that, when I talk about regenerative-adaptive pattern language. So when we regenerate, it means we go beyond sustainability. That means we need to link these two philosophies or theories or practices. So this is where, if we just do biophilic design and try to improve the health and well-being of humans, that means we will probably still be in a degenerative spiral. That's why we need to bring in the practices of both, where we bring regenerative design and biophilic design together so that it becomes part of that upward spiral. The good thing about biophilic design, it starts to help us to connect back to nature and bring back love to nature. So if we love nature, we will try, then by, in my opinion, by subconscious mind will say, don't destroy nature, so I have to bring in my sustainable principles, the materials, and so forth.
Thank you. So Jane's asked two questions that relate to some of your earlier slides. The first one was, do you think that the challenge came before rapid urbanisation? That is, with the view that we are separate from nature?
Yes, I think it started in pre-industrialization age, or then in that industrial world, where everything becomes so much about what we produce, the mechanical approach to everything, and that start to drive us moving away with this thinking or connection to our environment. So, and this is where in the early 70s or late 60s around, we already had to get the environmental movement that's coming up and really asking big questions. So that is where the problems start. But due to industrialization, that's why our cities become so easily bigger. So really that started the trend so that urbanization is easy to do. So that our cities just become then massive. So the cause was before rapid urbanization, starting really in the industrial age, I'll say.
And Jane's second question was, could virtual connection to nature be considered a mechanism for delivering the 14 patterns rather than the 15th pattern?
No, because if you really deeply look at it, a lot of the other patterns, when we look at the sensory experiences that you need, there's, for example, smells, touch, feel, textures, all of these things can't be in a virtual environment. So I do have a PhD student currently that we're going to test how real is biophilic design patterns and how really does that influence our psychological and physiological responses. And so far, it is obvious that a virtual environment can't replace our real environment to create that sensory responses our body and our mind needs.
Thank you. So Danny has a question about ethics, saying, I worry about how choreographed design and well-mannered these environments are. Where is wild nature or nature for itself? These are cities for us as humans, but what about cities for wildlife on their own terms?
Very good question.
Mm-hmm. Got some tough ones today.
If it's up to me, I'll go back to wildlife, have a little, perhaps not even a tent, just a shelter, and live right there, just be a small part of nature. Edward Old Wilson's book, Half Earth, he raises this, not raises the question, he actually said that we have to set aside half of the earth if we ever think that there's survival for us and wild nature in the future. The fact is that we can't bring wild nature into the cities, but what we're doing currently, we are putting our cities in wild nature. And our cities is that parasites that's got those tentacles just sucking up and destroyed wild nature. So when we look at the ethical point or philosophical point of view, probably the trend of urbanization needs to be totally stopped if we want to say we really want to put that balance in place. But because of the trend of urbanization, to be practical, we could see that it's not going to stop. This is what's going to happen, is how could we improve that at least. And then, as I mentioned, regenerative design is about that those cities and our human-made environments must stop destroying our wild nature. So this is a huge challenge. And I acknowledge that wild nature is really important and we need to think of it. But in the context of architecture and design and how we create our built environments, this is about how we improve our nature in cities and spaces where human interfered, both for other species and for ourselves. But yeah, I must acknowledge that wild nature is really important. What can we do to help and protect our ecological systems and biodiversity of the earth? I think Edward L. Wilson's book, Half Earth, will be a really good book to read. I read that and I recommend you do that too.
Thank you. So Joel has asked, does good design need a balance between complexity and order? Can there be too much complexity in the design?
Yes. That's quite interesting. I just go back to nature. So if we look at the fundamentals about geometric forms and the systems and things in nature, it always balances. So if you put too much complexity and too much things into a space, it could become too busy, or it could be, it's like with everything. If it's too much of the one, it's really bad for the other. And this is where nature balances itself. And it's interesting, that's where Alexander's 15 properties of wholeness, or 15 fundamental properties of nature, that I put a new terminology to it as 15 properties of wholeness, is where one of the things he talks about the contrast and roughness in nature, and those patterns go beyond these 15 biophilic design patterns. Those patterns, one of them say is, if you look at nature, you got roughness, smoothness, you got water, you got sand, or you got dark and you got light, you got all of these things, but they always sort of in harmony and balance, and you will transfer from the one to the other. That is what we need to get into the space. So that means, yes, too much complexity and order in a space, or complexity, will not be the right thing to do. So this is why the science, that's why I say when people go, oh, I just apply some of the biophilic design patterns, you're not doing the right thing, because there's all of these really in-depth things behind the scenes we need to work out when we come to a final design solution.
And Vanessa has asked whether you can think of a really good example of bringing risk and peril into the nature of space. All right, Bikala, can go back to her after the...
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking there's a picture. If you go to Terrapin Bright Green's, that 14 patterns booklet, you go online, you'll find it. You'll see it's interesting. They show a passageway walking up, and there's this huge rock boulder up in the sky, and you have to walk under it. And that's a really good example for me, because it looks like it's just balancing in the air, and you're going to feel like this is going to fall on top of you. So that creates that. A very other simple thing is just normal balconies on buildings, and when you got a balustrade, there's a bit of glass and so on. There's a bit of, you get to it and you feel a bit scared. That's another one where it just very simply creates a bit of angst, because there's the risk. Heights, those type of things create that.
And this is regarding, do you think our modern cities, societies and communities could become boring if biophilic was applied to every building everywhere? Would it become too sort of futuristic and designed?
Well, if it goes with the trend that's happening now, probably, because we're not dealing with the real science of it. It could be just become another fad, and I actually said it online on one of the articles that I wrote. It is like modernism. Modernist buildings become boring because it's just simple, or it's got a certain form. So what we need to do is go back and really identify what is all those patterns that don't make it boring. Like, you go into nature and you're never bored. So you would really be able to bring that back. And so, and also just think of it, not every city and everywhere in the world will have the same plants, same textures, same patterns, because if you bring all the patterns in, your geology, your colors, your plants will change, because some is temperate climate, cold climates, warm climates. It is all about the patterns of culture. And if I look at patterns of our Aboriginal drawings and patterns of the Maori drawings and patterns of our African tribes drawings are quite different. So if we start to put all of this in the pot and mix it up, I think it will become really interesting places to live.
Thank you. I think we might just do two more. There are a lot of questions coming in. This has been a really interesting topic, and a lot of people would like to ask you more. But I'll just end with, so David asked, how does this approach align with the need to balance fire risk in the built environment?
David, you're really giving me a difficult question here. So fire risk in the built environment depends on, I mean, in areas where there's really hot and dry climates, and you've got your plants and that right against your buildings, obviously the fire risk is higher. And this is where there needs to be quite a bit more research done, as what if there is some elements that we cannot apply, what other biophilic patterns can we bring in? So for example, let's say it's really a high heat area, highly fire risk area. Perhaps it's not that there's a vegetation specific right against the building, but it's other things like patterns, soils, water, all different things we bring in, textures to try to create it. But this is part of further research where when we look at also natural disasters, so how do you use nature's elements to deal with this, and where do we bring it in? And this is probably bringing back to the question about the built environment, cities as urbanization. I think we're not supposed to live in this high density cities. That happens because of the Industrial Revolution. What we're supposed to live in small communities scattered all across, like the old little towns, where there's not many people, because then everything is in balance, and then probably won't have these risks that we've got today.
And well, last one. So Ashley has referenced the City of Greater Geelong Green Spine project, and now there's calls to remove it. So wondering, how can we use the evidence base behind the design to continue a project such as this, but also a more general question, how do we make this accessible for the public to understand the benefits? Have you got any suggestions around that?
Well, I guess it's awareness. So there's quite a lot of work that we do. There's the Geelong Design Week coming up. What's been last year, the Geelong Design Week, the School of Lost Arts had a whole day on biophilic design. We had workshops and people attend. This year it's going to be the same, and it's supposed to be out there that people know about it. There is a public lecture also where we look at how can cities and Geelong look like, and also chains looking at biophilia. So it's really about awareness, and how does the public know about these benefits, is that we need to go out there and let a message happen. The good news too is that because we in Geelong, we are talking to the Geelong Council about the city and how it can embrace biophilic design and so forth. So yeah, it's quite interesting. If we look at our current, we are so used to concrete roads, just buildings. I get in my car, I stop in a car park, I buy something and I go home. That whole culture is really wrong for health and well-being. So we need to change the mindset and attitude to this. And when we get that right, we probably will help to influence things like the green spine not being taken out, but actually enhanced. And if there's little problems in nature spaces in cities, we can easily overcome it. If Singapore can have itself as a whole city in a garden, they got more problems with extreme water, downpour events and heat and all those type of things. Why can't we do it in other places in the world? And I guess it's just about a change of behavior and attitude, that we do more positive rather than try to get rid of nature.
Thank you. So we're just finishing off for today. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us and for the fantastic questions and answer time that we've just had. There are a lot more coming through and there's some really good feedback, so we appreciate your time today. You can follow Deakin Alumni on social media to hear about more upcoming webinars, and we have our Deakin Times monthly newsletter as well where they will be listed. Don't forget about the bursary. There's a 15% off postgraduate course fees for Deakin alumni and immediate family members. Some terms and conditions apply around that, so have a look into it if you'd like to come back and study again. And we really thank everyone for joining us today. The recording will be available, as I mentioned before, in about 3 weeks' time on the Deakin Alumni website. You can also update your contact details there as well. And we're going to finish off now, so we hope you can join us again another time. Thank you.
Thank you.